The haunting melody drifted through the empty chapel on the edge of Whispering Creek, a town clinging to the dusty Arizona territory of 1876 like a stubborn burr. Inside, Hannah Keller's fingers moved over the piano keys, each note a tear she couldn't shed for her father, gone 3 months now. The hymn was hers, born from a grief so deep it had its own sound. She was so lost in it, she never heard the chapel door creak, never saw the tall shadow that fell across the wooden floor, blocking the last of the dying sun. She only knew she wasn't alone when a sound, a choked, guttural sob, shattered her concentration. Her hands froze mid-chord. She spun around on the bench. There, standing in the aisle, was a man she'd never laid eyes on. His face was weathered, carved by sun and time, and it was streaked with tears. A worn hat was clutched in his hand, pressed hard against his chest, as if trying to hold his heart in place. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, locked with hers. And in that moment, Hannah felt a jolt, a shocking sense of recognition, as if this stranger could see every secret corner of her soul. "I'm sorry, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble, thick with an accent from somewhere south. He quickly swiped a bandana across his face, but it was too late. The raw emotion was already out. "I didn't mean to intrude. That song you're playing, it reminded me of someone." Heat rushed to Hannah's cheeks. No one, not a single soul besides her father, had ever heard her play her own music. It was a private language between them. "The chapel is open to all, sir. It's no intrusion." She smoothed the front of her simple blue dress, suddenly feeling exposed, as if he'd caught her naked instead of just grieving. "Yates Aldridge," he said, offering a slight, respectful bow. "Just passing through, heard the music and, well, I couldn't help myself." "Hannah Keller," she replied, rising to her feet. "Most folks in Whispering Creek know better than to wander in when I'm at the keys." He took a slow step forward, the gentle jingle of his spurs, the only sound besides the blood rushing in her ears. He stopped a few feet from the piano, his stormy eyes fixed on her. "That piece, did you write it yourself?" The awe in his voice was genuine, disarming. "I did. For my father. He passed recently." "My condolences, Miss Keller," he said softly. "It was beautiful enough to make a grown man weep, as you clearly witnessed." A sheepish, crooked smile touched his lips, and it changed his whole face, softening the hard lines. For the first time in 3 long months, Hannah felt a real smile return the gesture. A warmth spread through her chest, an unexpected thaw in her frozen grief. "Thank you, Mr. Aldridge," she said, her voice a little unsteady. "Would you care to hear it again? Properly this time, without the interruptions?" "I'd be honored, madam." So as the sun bled out behind the dusty hills, painting the stained glass windows in hues of orange and purple, Hannah played. She played for the weeping stranger. And as the notes filled the empty chapel, she felt a strange sense that his tears were somehow washing away her own sorrow, piece by piece. But she couldn't shake the feeling, the deep, unsettling feeling, that his connection to her song went deeper than just a passing memory. There was something else in his eyes, a darkness she couldn't name, a secret waiting to break free. Yates Aldridge hadn't planned on staying in Whispering Creek. A man like him never stayed anywhere. For 2 years he'd been a ghost, drifting from one forgotten town to the next, taking whatever work he could find and keeping his head down. But the song in the chapel had hooked him, dragged him out of the current of his lonely life, and left him stranded on the shores of this dusty, forgotten town. It wasn't just the music. It was the woman who played it, the quiet strength in her grief. The next morning found him standing outside the town's only mercantile. The sign above the door read, "Keller's Mercantile." The paint faded, but proud. Her father's store, now hers. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open, a small bell announcing his arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt entirely out of place. "Mr. Aldrich," Hannah said, looking up from behind the counter. Surprise flickered in her eyes, followed by something else. Something he couldn't quite read. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Miss Keller," he nodded, feeling a strange awkwardness settle over him. He dusted his clothes and slicked back his hair, trying to look respectable, but he still felt like a wolf in a henhouse. "I was wondering if there might be any work to be had around here. My horse could use a good long rest, and so could I." He let the lie hang in the air, unwilling to admit the truth, that he couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. Hannah studied him, her gaze sharp and intelligent. At 24, she had the eyes of someone who'd seen her share of hardship and had learned to be wary of men who drifted in on the evening wind. But then, her expression softened. Something in his gaze, some honest plea he hadn't even known he was making, seemed to get through to her. "As it happens, Mr. Aldrich, we are short-handed since Father passed," she admitted, her voice low. "My sister and I, we're struggling to manage the deliveries to the outlying ranches." She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. "It isn't much, but if you're handy with a wagon and can defend a shipment if need be." "I can handle both, madam," he said, relief washing over him. "Been driving wagons since I was 12. He instinctively patted the holstered Colt at his hip. "And I can protect what needs protecting." Just then, a younger woman, a mirror image of Hannah, but with a harder edge, emerged from the storeroom. She sized Yates up with a single suspicious glance. "Hannah, what are you doing? Are you hiring this man? We don't know the first thing about him." "He's just passing through, Lizzie, and we need the help," Hannah said, her tone firm but gentle. She turned her attention back to Yates. "The position is temporary, Mr. Aldrich, until we can find someone permanent." "Temporary suits me just fine," Yates replied, though the word sent a strange pang through his chest. He was a temporary man. It shouldn't have bothered him. But it did. By noon, he was guiding a heavy wagon out of town, a list of deliveries in his pocket, and a map Hannah had carefully drawn for him. As the miles rolled by, he found himself humming her melody, the haunting notes swirling in his head with 1,000 unanswered questions. He told himself he was staying for the work, for the rest. But he knew deep down he was staying for the woman with the sad eyes and the song that held the key to his past. He had to know. He had to find out how Hannah Keller, a woman he'd never met, knew his mother's lullaby, the one she'd hum to him every night until the day she disappeared without a trace. The days that followed were a strange sort of peace for Yates. He worked hard, harder than he had in years. He hauled supplies, mended fences, and even fixed the leaky roof on the mercantile without being asked. He wanted Hannah to see him as more than just a drifter. He wanted her to trust him. But earning her trust felt like trying to hold sand in his fist. Every evening, after the store was closed and her sister Elizabeth had retired with a final, disapproving glare in his direction, he and Hannah would sit on the porch. They'd talk for hours, the conversations weaving a fragile thread between them. One night, with the scent of desert primrose heavy in the air, Hannah turned to him. "You never speak of your family, Yates. Is there anyone waiting for you somewhere?" He stared out at the dark silhouette of the mountains, the familiar ache tightening his chest. He gave her the story he gave everyone, the one that was true enough. Lost them. All of them. Parents before the war. My brother. During it. He flexed his left hand, the faint, crisscrossed scars on his palm catching the moonlight. Fought for the Union. Came back to Texas, and our ranch was just a pile of ashes. He saw the sympathy in her eyes, the genuine sorrow. It made him feel like even more of a fraud. "I'm so sorry, Yates," she whispered. He finally turned to look at her, her face soft in the twilight. "Nothing to be sorry for. Life deals the cards. You just play the hand you're given." He saw the opening and he took it, steering the conversation where he needed it to go. "Your music helps, makes the memories easier to bear." He watched her carefully. "Did your mother play? Your father mentioned you wrote it for him, but the style, it feels older." Hannah's expression shifted. A shadow passed over her features. "My mother, she was the musician in the family. She taught me everything I know." She looked away, towards the silent chapel at the edge of town. She left when I was a little girl. Left, not died." The word hung in the air between them. "I'm sorry," he said again, the words feeling hollow. "It was a long time ago," she said, her voice brittle. "I barely remember her, just flashes, and a song she used to hum. This one." She hummed the first few bars of the melody. His melody, his mother's melody. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was all he could do to keep his voice steady. "Could we go to the chapel? I'd like to hear it again. The acoustics in there, they make it sound like it's coming from heaven itself." "I'd like that," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. That night she played for him for hours, and as the music filled the sacred space, Yates felt like he was being torn in two. One part of him was falling for this strong, sad woman, his soul reaching for hers like a drowning man reaches for a rope. But the other part, the part that had been hunting for the truth for years, knew he was getting dangerously close. He was using her grief to uncover his own. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that when she found out who he really was and why he was really here, she wouldn't just hate him, she would be destroyed. And the worst part, he might just deserve it. Weeks turned into a month, then two. Yates Aldridge, the drifter, had become a fixture in Whispering Creek. He was no longer just the hired hand, he was a friend, a confidant. Even Elizabeth's suspicion had thawed to a grudging acceptance. But for Hannah, it was something more. Something terrifying and thrilling that made her heart beat like a wild drum whenever he was near. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. One moment he was open and kind, his laughter echoing on the mercantile porch. The next, a shadow would fall over his eyes, a darkness that seemed to swallow him whole, and he'd be a stranger to her all over again. She knew he was hiding something. She could feel it in the way he'd sometimes fall silent in the middle of a sentence, or the way his hand would drift to the gun on his hip when riders from out of town passed through. He asked about her mother constantly, gentle but persistent questions. What did she look like? Where did she say she was from? Did she ever mention a place called Blackwood Ridge? The questions made an old wound ache inside Hannah, a wound she thought had long since scarred over. One evening in late May, a monster of a thunderstorm rolled in, turning the sky a bruised purple. Hannah had sought refuge in the chapel, the piano her only comfort against the raging storm. She was just about to make a run for it when the door creaked open. Yates stood there, soaked to the bone, his shirt plastered to his chest. He held out a lantern and her shawl. "Thought you might need this," he said, dripping a puddle onto the floor. Storm came on quick. "You're drenched," she exclaimed, rushing to take the items from him. "You'll catch your death of a cold." "Worth it," he said, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. "To make sure you were safe." A clap of thunder rattled the windows, breaking the spell. "We should wait it out," she said, her voice breathless. She gestured to the piano bench. "Play with me. I've been working on a duet." He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "I'm no musician, Hannah." "I'll teach you the simple part," she pleaded. "Please." He couldn't refuse her. He settled beside her on the narrow bench, their shoulders brushing. A jolt, sharp and hot, shot through her. It had nothing to do with the lightning. She guided his large, calloused hands to the keys, showing him a simple, repeating harmony. His fingers were surprisingly graceful. As they played, their simple melodies weaving together into something new, something beautiful, she felt a shift between them. It was more than friendship. It was a current, powerful and undeniable, pulling them together. He missed a note and let out a low, rumbling laugh. The sound was so full of pure joy, she couldn't help but laugh with him. In that moment, surrounded by the storm, their shared music was the only thing that mattered. When the rain finally stopped, they walked back to the mercantile under a sky washed clean and studded with stars. At her door, he stopped. "Thank you, Hannah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For the music. For making me feel like I might belong somewhere again." Before she could find her voice, he tipped his hat and melted into the night, leaving her with a heart that felt like it might beat its way right out of her chest. But their newfound peace was shattered the very next day. Trouble rode into Whispering Creek on 5 tired horses. They were cattle rustlers, a gang led by a man whose name was whispered with fear across the territory. Billy Graves. He was tall and wiry, with cold, dead eyes that missed nothing. They swaggered into the mercantile while Hannah was alone, Elizabeth having gone to visit a sick friend. "Well now, what have we here?" Graves drawled, his eyes sliding over Hannah in a way that made her skin crawl. "Prettiest little shopkeeper I ever did see." Hannah stood her ground. "Can I help you gentlemen find something?" "Oh, I think I already found what I'm looking for," he said with a greasy smirk. He reached across the counter, his grimy fingers aiming for her cheek. But before he could touch her, a voice, calm and deadly as a rattlesnake's warning, cut through the tension. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Yates stood in the doorway. He looked casual, relaxed, but his hand hovered inches from his Colt. Graves turned, slow and deliberate. His eyes narrowed. A flicker of recognition, and something else. Hatred passed across his face. "Aldridge," he spat the name like a curse. "Fancy meeting you here. This ain't your business." "The lady doesn't seem to welcome your attention," Yates said, his voice dropping an octave. "That makes it my business." The air in the store crackled. Graves stared at Yates, a silent, violent battle being fought in their locked gazes. Then, Graves let out a harsh barking laugh. "Another time, perhaps." He nodded to his men, and they filed out, their spurs scraping against the floorboards. But at the door, Graves turned back, his cold eyes landing on Hannah. "We'll be seeing you around, miss." The threat was unmistakable. When they were gone, Hannah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Thank you, Yates." His jaw was a knot of stone. "Those men are trouble, Hannah. Graves has a reputation that would curdle milk." He turned from the window, his face a mask of concern. "Promise me you'll be careful. Keep this door locked when you're alone." His fierce protectiveness sent a thrill through her, but it was laced with a cold dread. This wasn't random. Graves knew Yates, and the way he'd said his name. It wasn't the greeting of an old friend. It was the acknowledgement of an old enemy. Yates wasn't just a drifter with a sad past. He was a man with enemies, dangerous enemies. And he had brought them right to her doorstep. The secrets he was keeping were no longer just his. They were hers now, too. And she had a sinking feeling they were about to get them both killed. That night, sleep was a luxury Hannah couldn't afford. The image of Billy Graves' dead eyes was burned into her mind. The way he had looked at Yates. It was personal. She threw back the covers and dressed in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on her. She needed air. She needed the comfort of her piano. She slipped out and made her way to the chapel, the moon a silver coin in the inky sky. She didn't light a lantern. She knew the keys by heart. As her fingers found their place, she began to play, not the hymn for her father, but a frantic, chaotic piece that mirrored the storm in her soul. She poured all her fear, all her confusion, all her terrifying, impossible feelings for Yeats into the music. Who was he? What trouble had he brought to her quiet life? She was so lost in the tempest of her own making that she didn't hear the chapel door whisper open behind her. She didn't sense the presence until a hand, rough and smelling of whiskey and grime, clamped over her mouth. A scream died in her throat. Such pretty music, a familiar, chilling voice whispered in her ear. Billy Graves. I told you we'd be seeing you again. Thought we might continue our conversation, without your boyfriend interrupting this time. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but his grip was like iron. He started dragging her backwards, towards the open door where the silhouettes of his men waited against the moonlight. This was it. This was how it ended. But they never made it to the door. It burst open with a crash that shook the small building. Framed in the moonlight, a figure stood, his gun already drawn. Yeats. Let her go, Graves. Graves laughed, a high, unhinged sound. He yanked Hannah in front of him, using her as a shield, the cold steel of a knife pressing against her throat. You're outnumbered, Aldridge. My boys are right outside. We're outside, Yeats corrected, his voice dangerously calm. Sheriff Taylor has them saying their prayers right now. It's just you and me. Hannah felt a flicker of uncertainty in the arm that held her. It was the only chance she'd get. She stomped down, hard, on Graves's instep with the heel of her boot. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. She twisted away, scrambling across the floor as Yeats lunged. The two men collided, crashing into a pew with the sound of splintering wood. They rolled on the floor, a tangle of limbs and curses, grappling for the knife. Hannah grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the altar, her knuckles white. She raised it high, but she couldn't bring it down, terrified of hitting Yeats. She didn't need to. With a sudden, brutal twist, Yeats wrenched the knife from Graves's hand and sent it skittering across the floor. A single, solid punch connected with Graves's jaw, and the outlaw went limp. For a moment, there was only the sound of Yeats's ragged breathing. He got to his feet and crossed to her in 2 strides. Are you hurt? He scanned her face, his eyes wild with a mixture of fury and relief. She just shook her head, unable to speak, her body trembling uncontrollably. Without another word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She buried her face in his chest, clinging to him, smelling the familiar scent of leather and dust, and the clean smell of the rain that was uniquely him. I was so afraid, she whispered. How did you know? I couldn't sleep, he murmured into her hair, his arms a cage of safety around her. Kept thinking about him, about you. I was checking the perimeter of the town when I saw a light flicker in here. Then I saw their horses tied up behind the old livery. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, to see the raw emotion in his eyes, the fierce protectiveness, the love. It was there, clear as day. Yeats, she began, but what she was going to say was lost forever. The chapel door opened again, and Sheriff Taylor stood there, his deputy behind him. Miss Keller, are you all right? The moment was shattered. Yeats instantly dropped his arms and stepped away, the mask of the stoic drifter slamming back into place. But it was too late. She had seen behind it. And what she'd seen had changed everything. As the sheriff hauled the unconscious outlaw away, Hannah's mind raced. This wasn't about cattle rustling. This was a blood feud. And Yates Aldridge was standing right in the middle of it. The secrets he was keeping weren't just dark, they were deadly. And she was tangled up in them now, For better or for worse, the sun was just beginning to touch the horizon with fingers of pink and gold by the time the chaos subsided. The whole town had woken up, buzzing with the news. Sheriff Taylor had questioned Hannah and Yates for hours, his gaze lingering on Yates with a new, calculating suspicion. By the time Yates walked her home, exhaustion was a heavy cloak on Hannah's shoulders. Elizabeth met them at the door, her face pale with terror, and pulled Hannah into a fierce hug before ordering her straight to bed. Hannah slept a dead, dreamless sleep, waking in the late afternoon to the sun streaming through her window. A piece of folded paper had been slipped under her door. Her heart leaped. She knew the bold, decisive handwriting. "Meet me at the chapel at sunset." Just those 6 words. No name. None was needed. Her hands trembled as she dressed, choosing a soft lavender gown that she hadn't worn since before her father's passing. She took extra time with her hair, pinning it up but leaving a few dark curls to frame her face. The whole walk to the chapel was a blur of well-wishes from townsfolk. They all praised the brave Mr. Aldridge, the hero who had saved her. If they only knew. If she only knew. The chapel was empty when she arrived, but the air was thick with anticipation. Dozens of candles flickered on the altar, casting a warm, golden glow over the worn pews. Wild desert flowers, their colors vibrant and alive, had been placed in tin cans all along the aisle. It was beautiful. She walked to the piano, her sanctuary, her confessional. She ran her fingers lightly over the ivory keys, the whole whirlwind of the last few months culminating in this single moment. It had all started here, with a song. "I hoped you'd come." She turned. Yates stood in the doorway, and for the first time he looked nervous. He wasn't wearing his dusty work clothes. He had on a clean white shirt and a dark vest. His hair was combed back from his forehead, and he was holding his hat in his hands instead of on his head. He looked like a man preparing for a hanging. Or a wedding. "I wasn't sure I could ever come back in here," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "After last night." "I understand," he said, walking slowly towards her. He didn't sit on the bench, but stood beside it, looking down at her. "But I hope you will. Your music. It's too beautiful to be silenced by fear, or by men like Graves." He paused, taking a deep, shaky breath. "Hannah, there are things I need to tell you. Things I should have told you from the very beginning." Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Why did Graves know you? He called you Aldridge, but it sounded like a curse." "Because to his kind, it is," Yates said, his eyes dark with old pain. He finally looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I've been drifting for a long time, Hannah. Running. From my name. From my family. From the man I was supposed to become." His voice dropped, becoming heavy with the weight of his confession. "My story about losing my family in the war. It wasn't the whole truth. My brother did die. But my father is a man named Marcus Thorne." Thorne. The name hit Hannah like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face. Marcus Thorne. The ruthless cattle baron from Texas who had systematically destroyed a dozen smaller ranchers, including her own father. He had cheated him, ruined him, and forced him to flee with his family in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The shame and stress of it had broken her father's health, leading to his early grave. Marcus Thorne was the monster in her family's story, the source of all their pain. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "It can't be." "My real name is Yates Thorne," he said, the words falling like stones in the silent chapel. "Billy Graves used to work for my father. He was his right-hand man, his enforcer. I ran away from that life 2 years ago, after I saw the kind of man my father truly was. I took my mother's maiden name, Aldridge, and I never looked back." It all clicked into place. The secrets, the darkness in his eyes, the way he carried himself like a man at war with his own shadow. He wasn't just a drifter, he was the son of her sworn enemy. He had stood here, in this chapel, and wept at her song of grief, a grief his own family had caused. The irony was so cruel, so twisted, it stole the air from her lungs. "And the song?" she asked, her voice cold, brittle. "How did you know my song?" This was it, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. "Because it wasn't your song to begin with," he said softly, his face etched with a sorrow so profound it mirrored her own. "It was my mother's, and yours, your mother, Eleanor Keller, and my mother, Lydia Aldridge. They were friends, a secret friendship they kept from our fathers. They met in secret for years, they shared music. My mother told me Eleanor was the most gifted person she'd ever known. She hummed that lullaby to me every night of my childhood. A song, she said, that her dearest friend had composed." Hannah stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. Her mother, who she barely remembered, had been friends with the wife of the man who destroyed them. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, as she looked into Yates's tortured eyes, she knew, with every fiber of her being, that it was the truth. He hadn't come to Whispering Creek by chance. He had been led here, by a ghost, by a song, by a destiny that had entangled their families long before they were ever born. He was the son of the villain in her life's story, and she, God help her, was in love with him. The silence in the chapel was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Hannah felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her, leaving her free falling through a nightmare. "So you lied to me," she said, the words flat, devoid of emotion. "From the very beginning, every conversation, every shared meal, it was all a lie." "No," Yates said, taking a step closer. She flinched and he stopped, the hurt on his face so raw it was painful to see. "Not all of it. Hannah, when I first heard you playing, I thought I'd found my mother. She disappeared the same year your family was forced out of Texas. She couldn't live with what my father had done. She just vanished. All I had left of her was that song. For 2 years I've been following whispers of it, hoping it would lead me to her. When I heard it coming from this chapel, I thought my search was over." He raked a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. "I came here looking for my mother, but I stayed for you. Everything I've felt for you, that's been real. The only real thing in my life for a very long time." "And Billy Graves," she pressed, her voice trembling. "Why is he here? Why is he after you?" "My father is dying," Yates said, his voice grim. "He's left his entire empire to me, his only surviving son. But there's a condition. I have to come home and take my place as his heir. If I don't, everything goes to his top lieutenant, Billy Graves. Graves thinks if he gets rid of me, the inheritance is his. But it's more than that. There are ledgers, proof of every crime my father ever committed. Land grabs, murders, everything. I know where they're hidden. Graves wants them. He wants to burn the past and take over the whole operation." It was a story of greed and betrayal, worthy of a dime novel. But this was her life. The man she loved was a prince in hiding, and the dragon had just come to burn down her village to get to him. She stood up from the piano bench, her legs unsteady. She walked to the stained glass window, staring out at the fading light, without really seeing it. "My father died believing he was a failure," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He died of a broken heart, a heart your father broke. And you let me talk about him. You let me grieve for him, all while knowing you were the son of the man responsible." "I know," he whispered, "and I will carry that shame for the rest of my days. I can't change who my father is, Hannah. I can't undo what he did. But I am not him. I swear to you, I am not him. A crash from the street outside made them both jump. Shouts echoed through the quiet evening. Another crash, this time the sound of shattering glass from the mercantile. Graves wasn't waiting. He was making his move. He's trying to smoke me out, Yates said, his hand already on his gun. He'll burn the whole town to the ground if he has to. He looked at her, his storm-colored eyes pleading. Hannah, I need you to trust me. Just for a little while longer. I have a plan, but I can't do it alone. She looked from his desperate face to the flickering candlelight, to the piano that had started it all. Her life had been a simple, sad song. And then he had walked in, bringing with him a crashing, chaotic symphony of danger and passion and impossible truths. She could turn him away, let him face his demons alone, or she could stand and fight with him. Fight for the man he was, not the man his father had been. Fight for the impossible, terrifying love that had taken root in her heart. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice shaking but firm. In that moment, she made her choice. She would not be the daughter of a victim. She would be the master of her own song. "The ledgers," Yates said, his voice low and urgent as the sounds of chaos grew louder outside. "They're not just a record of his crimes. They're leverage. The proof is in a safe box buried under the hearth of my father's old hunting cabin, about 10 miles east of here. A place called Blackwood Ridge. Graves knows about the cabin, but he doesn't know the secret of the hearth. If I can get to them, I can hand them over to the territorial marshal. It would be enough to bring down not just Graves, but my father's entire organization." "But Graves and his men are tearing the town apart looking for you," Hannah said, her mind racing. "You'll never make it out of town, let alone 10 miles through open country." "Not me," Yates said, a grim determination setting in his jaw. "Us." He saw the shock on her face and hurried to explain. "They're looking for one man. They won't be looking for a man and a woman in a supply wagon, heading out for a late delivery. We can use the mercantile wagon, load it up with some provisions. If anyone stops us, we say we're making an emergency run to the Hartman Ranch. It's in the same direction." It was a desperate, foolhardy plan, but it was the only one they had. "Elizabeth," Hannah said, her thoughts immediately going to her sister. "I can't just leave her here." "She'll be safer with Sheriff Taylor," Yates assured her. "I'll get a message to him. He can deputize some of the townsfolk. They can hold them off, create a diversion while we slip out the back way." They moved quickly, a silent, efficient team. While Yates scribbled a note for the sheriff, Hannah ran back to the mercantile, her heart pounding with every step. The front windows were shattered, and a few of Graves's men were trying to kick in the front door. Ignoring them, she slipped in through the rear entrance to the storeroom. She found Elizabeth hiding behind a stack of flour sacks, clutching their father's old shotgun, her face pale but resolute. "They're after Yates," Hannah explained in a frantic whisper, pulling her sister towards the cellar door. "We have to go. There's a plan." She quickly relayed the desperate scheme, seeing the fear in Elizabeth's eyes war with her protective instinct. "You're going with him," Elizabeth hissed. "Hannah, he's the son of Marcus Thorne. Have you lost your mind?" "There's no time, Lizzie. He's not his father. I trust him." The words, once spoken aloud, solidified into a truth she could hold on to. "Go to the sheriff's office. Stay there. Barricade the door. We'll be back. I promise." She hugged her sister fiercely, then pushed her towards the back alley. "Go. Now." Moments later, Yates appeared in the storeroom, his gun drawn. "Taylor has the note. He's gathering men at the saloon. It's the best diversion I can offer." Together, they loaded the wagon in the dark, their movements swift and silent. Hannah threw in blankets, a canteen of water, and a sack of dried jerky, while Yates hitched the two strongest horses. Every shout from the main street, every distant gunshot, sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through her. She was a shopkeeper, a musician, and now she was an outlaw's accomplice, fleeing in the dead of night. With Yates handling the reins, they guided the wagon down a back alley, the wheels crunching softly on the dirt. They slipped out of town like ghosts, melting into the vast, dark expanse of the desert. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon and the steady clopping of the horses' hooves. The moon was their only guide, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like specters. Finally, Yates broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I never wanted to bring this to your door." "It seems this trouble was at my door my whole life," she replied, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I just didn't know it." She looked at him, his profile a hard, determined line in the moonlight. "Tell me about her, your mother." He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he began to speak, his voice soft with memory. Her name was Lydia. She was gentle, kind. In a world full of thorns, she was the only rose. She hated what my father was, what he did to people. She tried to leave him dozens of times, but he was powerful. He wouldn't let her go. Her friendship with your mother was her only escape. They had a secret world, just the two of them. He fell silent again, and Hannah could feel the depth of his loss, a grief that mirrored her own. They were two halves of the same sad story, their mother's friendship, the one bright thread in a dark tapestry of greed and hate. "She would be proud of you," Hannah said softly, "for running, for trying to make things right." His hand left the reins and found hers in the dark. His grip was strong, steady. "Thank you," he whispered. It was all he said, but it was enough. They rode on through the night, the looming shapes of the mountains growing closer. But they weren't alone in the darkness. As the first hint of dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Yates suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt, his body tensed. "What is it?" Hannah whispered. "Riders," he said, his voice a low growl. "Two of them, coming up fast behind us." He looked at her, his eyes full of a grim apology. Their desperate gamble had failed. The dragon had found them. "Get down," Yates commanded, his voice sharp and low. Hannah didn't hesitate. She scrambled into the back of the wagon, pressing herself down behind sacks of grain. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a frantic drum of terror. She peeked through a small gap between two wooden slats. Two riders were closing in fast, their forms dark against the pearly light of dawn. Yates didn't draw his weapon, not yet. He sat tall on the driver's bench, the reins held loosely in one hand, the other resting casually on his lap, inches from his colt. He was playing the part of a simple wagon driver, a man with nothing to hide. The riders pulled up alongside the wagon, one on each side, effectively boxing them in. They weren't from Graves's gang. They were strangers, their faces hard and unreadable under the wide brims of their hats. "That's far enough, friend," one of them said, his voice raspy. "Pull up." "Morning, gentlemen," Yates said, his tone easy, conversational. "Something I can help you with? We're in a bit of a hurry, making a delivery to the Hartman place." The second rider laughed, a cold, empty sound. "The Hartman ranch is 10 miles back the other way. You're a little lost, aren't you?" "Thorne?" The name sent a chill down Hannah's spine. These men knew who he was. They weren't just random highwaymen. This was an ambush. Yates didn't flinch. "You seem to have me mistaken for someone else. Name's Aldridge." "We know who you are," the first rider sneered. "And we know what you're after. The old man sent us. He's changed his mind about the inheritance. He wants the ledgers back. And he wants you. Gone. Permanently." So this was it. His own father had sent assassins. The final, brutal betrayal. Everything happened in a blur. Yates moved with a speed that was terrifying. In one fluid motion, he drew his Colt and fired, not at the men, but at the ground right in front of the horse on his left. The animal reared up, screaming in terror, unseating its rider. At the same instant, Yates kicked the brake lever and yelled, "Hee-yah!" slapping the reins hard against the backs of their own horses. The wagon lurched forward violently, throwing Hannah against the side. The second rider, caught by surprise, cursed and fought to control his spooked mount. Yates fired again, and the man's hat flew from his head. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was trying to give them a chance to escape. They thundered down the trail, the wagon bouncing and rattling over the rocky terrain. Hannah clung to the side, her knuckles white. She risked another look back. The two men were already remounted, their guns drawn, firing after them. A bullet splintered the wood of the tailgate, inches from her head. Another whizzed past Yates's ear with an angry buzz. They were expert riders, gaining on the clumsy, heavy wagon with every passing second. They were trapped. "The canyon!" Yates shouted over the roar of the wheels and the crack of gunfire. "Just ahead! Hold on!" Hannah saw it then, a narrow slit in the rock face, barely wide enough for the wagon. It was a shortcut, but a treacherous one. One wrong move, and they'd be smashed to pieces against the canyon walls. Yates didn't hesitate. He expertly guided the horses into the opening, the sides of the wagon scraping against the rock with a deafening screech of tortured metal and wood. The riders couldn't follow them in on horseback. They were forced to dismount, giving them precious seconds. The canyon path was short but brutal. They emerged back into the open, the wagon battered, one wheel wobbling precariously. But they were alive. They had a lead. They pushed the horses hard, knowing their time was running out. Finally, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Yates pointed to a dilapidated cabin nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees. "Blackwood Ridge, we're here." He pulled the wagon into the trees, out of sight of the main trail. "Stay here, keep watch," he ordered Hannah as he jumped down, grabbing a small shovel from the back. She watched him run to the cabin, her heart in her throat. Every rustle of the leaves, every cry of a distant hawk sounded like approaching doom. Minutes felt like hours. He was taking too long. Something was wrong. Unable to wait any longer, she grabbed the shotgun from the wagon and ran towards the cabin. The door was ajar. She pushed it open and crept inside. The cabin was one small dusty room, and it was empty. The hearthstone was pulled aside, revealing a dark, gaping hole. The hole was empty too. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, raising the shotgun. It wasn't one of the riders. It was Yates. He wasn't holding a metal safe box. He was holding a single yellowed envelope. His face was pale, his expression one of utter devastation. "It's not here," he said, his voice a hollow echo of itself. "The ledgers, they're gone. All that's left is this." He held out the envelope. It was addressed to him, in his mother's elegant, looping script. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal. He read the letter aloud, his voice cracking. It was a farewell, a confession. His mother had taken the ledgers years ago, on the night she fled. She couldn't bear to leave such a weapon in her husband's hands, but she couldn't bring herself to destroy the only thing that could ever truly stop him either. She wrote that she had hidden them somewhere safe, somewhere only she would know. And then, the final, soul-crushing lines. "My dearest Yates, I have gone to find my friend Eleanor. She is the only one I can trust. We have a place, a sanctuary where no one can find us. If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. Find the place where two rivers meet as one, and look beneath the whispering willow. Your loving mother, Lydia." Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips. Two rivers, the whispering willow. She knew that place. It was a spot just outside of Whispering Creek. A place her father had taken her as a child. A place her mother had loved. They stared at each other, the impossible truth dawning on them. His mother hadn't just run away. She had run here, to Whispering Creek, to her friend. But Hannah's mother had disappeared years before that. What did it mean? Before they could process the revelation, the sound of hoofbeats, close this time, shattered the silence. The assassins had found them. Yates grabbed her arm, his eyes blazing with a new, desperate fire. "We're not going to find justice in a box of ledgers, Hannah. The truth is back in Whispering Creek, and we're going to find it." He pulled her towards the back of the cabin, where a small broken window looked out onto the steep, rocky hillside. Their escape was over. The final confrontation was about to begin. "There's no way out," Hannah said, her voice tight with panic as the sound of the riders dismounting reached them. "There's always a way out," Yates countered, his eyes scanning the back of the cabin. "They're expecting us to fight or surrender. They're not expecting us to vanish." He kicked open the rotten back door of the cabin, revealing a steep, wooded incline. "Come on, we go on foot from here." They scrambled out the back and up the hillside, using the thick brush for cover. Below, they heard the men storm the cabin, shouting in anger and frustration when they found it empty. "They'll be on our trail in minutes," Yates said, pulling her along. "We have to move fast." They ran, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. They slid down ravines and scrambled up rocky outcrops, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and their pursuers. For 2 days they traveled, surviving on the jerky from the wagon and what little water they had left in the canteen. They moved by night and hid during the day, the hunters never far behind. During the stolen moments of rest, they talked, piecing together the fragmented puzzle of their mothers' lives. The Whispering Willow was a massive, ancient tree that stood at the confluence of 2 small creeks just a mile south of town. It was a local landmark, a place for lovers' picnics and children's games. A place so public, so obvious, that it was the perfect hiding spot. "My mother must have come here looking for yours," Hannah reasoned, "but my mother was already gone by then." "What if she found her?" Yates countered, a wild hope in his eyes. "What if they left together? What if your mother didn't abandon you, Hannah? What if she was running for her life and my mother helped her escape?" It was a beautiful thought, a comforting revision of her painful childhood. But it was just a theory. As they finally crested the last ridge overlooking Whispering Creek, their hope turned to ash. The town was an armed camp. Billy Graves and his men had taken over, their horses tied up all along the main street. They had turned the saloon into their headquarters, and armed thugs patrolled the streets. Sheriff Taylor was nowhere to be seen. "He's barricaded himself and a few good men in the jail," Yates guessed, his face grim. "Graves is trying to starve them out. He's holding the whole town hostage." "We can't just walk in," Hannah said, stating the obvious. "We don't have to," Yates said, his gaze shifting to the south, towards the creeks. "We're not going into the town. We're going under it." He looked at her, a glimmer of his old confident smile returning. "Your father's mercantile. Does it still have the old root cellar?" Hannah's eyes widened. "Yes, it connects to the old mining tunnels. They run all over this area, the main tunnel. It has an exit vent right near the Whispering Willow." Their new plan was even more dangerous than the first. They would use the cover of night to get to the willow tree, find the ledgers, and then use the tunnels to sneak into the mercantile, right under Graves's nose. From there, they could get to the jail and arm the sheriff and his men with the proof they needed to rally the town. That night, they moved like shadows, sticking to the creek bed. They found the ancient willow, its long branches weeping towards the ground, creating a curtain of leaves. Beneath the largest, most gnarled root, they found a section of earth that looked slightly disturbed. They dug with their bare hands, frantically scraping away the dirt and rock. About 2 feet down, their fingers hit something hard and metallic. The safe box. It was heavy, rusted, but intact. Yates used a large rock to smash the lock, the sound echoing unnervingly in the quiet night. Inside, nestled on a bed of oilcloth, were 3 thick, leather-bound ledgers. It was all there. Every crooked land deal, every bribe, every name of every man Marcus Thorne had ever paid to commit murder. It was a bomb, and they were about to walk it into the heart of the enemy's camp. They found the tunnel vent hidden in a thicket of bushes a few yards from the tree. The tunnels were dark, damp, and smelled of earth and decay. They navigated by touch, Yates leading the way, one hand on the tunnel wall, the other holding the heavy safe box. Hannah followed close behind, the shotgun feeling heavy and useless in the claustrophobic darkness. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint square of light above them, the grate to the mercantile cellar. Yates boosted Hannah up. She pushed the heavy wooden grate aside and scrambled into the familiar, dusty cellar of her own store. Yates passed up the box and then climbed up after her. They were in. They could hear the heavy tread of boots on the floorboards above them. Graves's men were in their house, drinking their liquor, waiting. The final stage of the plan was the most perilous. The jail was across the street, a 50-foot stretch of open ground, watched by at least 2 of Graves's guards. Diversion, Yates whispered. I'll create one at the back of the saloon. When you hear the commotion, you run. Don't stop for anything. Give the ledgers to Taylor. Tell him to read the entry for May 10th, 1868. It's all the proof he'll need. What are you going to do? She asked, her heart seizing with fear. I'm going to end this, he said, his face set like stone. This is my family's mess. It's time I cleaned it up. He pressed his pistol into her hand. Take this. You might need it more than me. Before she could protest, he leaned in and kissed her. A hard, desperate kiss full of fear and promise. I love you, Hannah Keller. Then he was gone, a shadow melting into the deeper shadows of the cellar. Hannah was alone, the fate of the town resting in her hands, the fate of the man she loved resting on a prayer. A few minutes later, an explosion rocked the far end of town, followed by shouts and a volley of gunfire. The diversion. This was her moment. Clutching the heavy box, Hannah took a deep breath, threw open the cellar door, and ran. Hannah burst out of the mercantile's back door and into the chaos. The explosion, which sounded like a case of dynamite, had come from the direction of the livery stable. Flames were already licking at the dry timber, casting a hellish, dancing glow over the town. Graves's men were shouting, disorganized, most of them running towards the fire. It was the perfect diversion. She didn't hesitate. She ran across the moonlit street, the heavy safe box banging against her legs, her lungs burning. The 2 guards posted outside the jail had turned to stare at the fire. They didn't see her until she was almost at the door. One of them shouted, turning to raise his rifle, but it was too late. Sheriff, she screamed, pounding on the heavy oak door. Sheriff Taylor, it's Hannah Keller. Open up! The guard was on her now, grabbing her arm, trying to wrench the box from her hands. She fought back, kicking and twisting, fueled by a strength she didn't know she possessed. Just as he raised his rifle butt to strike her, the jail door swung inward and a shotgun blast erupted over her head. The guard crumpled to the ground. Sheriff Taylor stood there, his face grim, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. He pulled her inside as his deputy dealt with the second guard. Miss Keller, what in tarnation is going on? He demanded, barring the door. It's all in here, she gasped, shoving the box into his hands. Proof. Everything you need to arrest Billy Graves and every man with him. Yates. He sent me. Read the page for May 10th. While the sheriff and his deputy tore open the box and began frantically scanning the ledgers, Hannah ran to the barred window. The town was a war zone. The fire at the livery was spreading, but now gunfire was coming from the other direction, from the saloon. Yates. He had drawn them into a fight. He was battling them single-handedly. My God, Sheriff Taylor breathed, looking up from the ledger, his face pale. It's all here. Warrants, names. Murder. This is enough to hang Marcus Thorne himself. He looked at his deputy. Round up every man in this town you trust. Arm them. We're taking back our town. Now. As the men mobilized, Hannah's eyes remained fixed on the saloon. She saw a figure dart between two buildings, firing a pistol. Yates. And then she saw him. Billy Graves, standing on the saloon's balcony, a rifle to his shoulder, taking careful aim. No! Hannah screamed, but her voice was lost in the din. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the flash from the rifle's muzzle. She saw Yates's body jolt, saw him stumble and fall back into the shadows of the alley. A primal cry tore from her throat. She didn't think. She just acted. Grabbing the pistol Yates had given her, she unbarred the jailhouse door and ran back out into the street, straight towards the saloon. She could hear the sheriff shouting her name, but she didn't care. All she could see was the alley where Yates had fallen. She reached the alley, her heart a block of ice in her chest. He was lying on his back, his shirt stained with a dark, spreading patch of red. His eyes were open, glazed with pain. Hannah, he rasped, reaching a hand towards her. You should have. Run. Not without you, she sobbed, dropping to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound, a futile attempt to stop the life pouring out of him. From the end of the alley, Billy Graves appeared, a triumphant, ugly smirk on his face. Well, isn't this sweet? I get to kill two lovebirds with one stone. He raised his rifle again, but this time Hannah was ready. With a steady hand she hadn't known she possessed, she raised the pistol Yates had given her, aimed, and fired. The shot was deafening in the narrow alley. Graves grunted, staggering back, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He clutched his shoulder, his rifle clattering to the ground. He looked from his wound to Hannah, his eyes filled with disbelief and rage. Before he could recover, the sound of dozens of running feet filled the air. Sheriff Taylor and a posse of armed townsmen swarmed the street, surrounding the saloon, overpowering Graves's shocked and disorganized men. The fight was over. Justice, swift and final, had come to Whispering Creek. But Hannah didn't see any of it. Her world had shrunk to the man lying in her arms, his breathing growing shallow. Stay with me, Yates, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Please don't leave me. His eyes found hers, and even through the pain she could see the love there. The song, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Play it for me. One last time. His eyes fluttered and closed. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and duty. Yates didn't die in that alley. The town doctor, a grizzled old man with surprisingly gentle hands, managed to dig the bullet out of his side, pronouncing it a miracle that it had missed any vital organs. The recovery was slow and agonizing, but he was alive. Billy Graves and his men were locked in the jail, awaiting the arrival of the territorial marshal. The ledgers had been sent under armed guard to the capital. The reign of Marcus Thorne was over. Hannah never left Yates's side. She nursed him, fed him, and when he was strong enough, she read to him. The town, her town, rallied around them. They had seen her courage, her fierce devotion. She was no longer just the quiet musician. She was a hero. When Yates was finally able to walk, leaning heavily on her, The first place he asked to go was the chapel. It was empty, quiet, just as it had been on the day they met. He sank onto the piano bench, his face pale but his eyes clear. "I thought I was dead," he said softly. "In that alley, all I could think about was you, about never hearing you play again." "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, sitting beside him. He took her hands in his. They were calloused and strong, the hands that had fought for her, that had held hers in the dark. "Hannah Keller, my whole life has been built on lies and shadows, but my feelings for you, they're the only true thing I've ever known. I don't have a name to offer you that isn't tainted. I don't have a fortune that isn't soaked in blood. All I have is my heart, and it's yours. It has been since the first note I heard you play." He didn't have to ask the question. His eyes asked it for him. "Yes," she said, tears of joy, not sorrow, filling her eyes. "Yes, Yates. 1,000 times, yes." They were married 3 weeks later, in that same chapel. The whole town came. Elizabeth, her skepticism finally and completely erased, stood as her sister's witness. Sheriff Taylor stood up for Yates. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and they had a town that had become their family. Yates, using the last of his own savings, bought a small plot of land at the edge of town. He built a small house with his own 2 hands. Hannah reopened the mercantile, her sister at her side. And the music returned. It filled their small home. It filled the chapel. It filled the hearts of the people of Whispering Creek. A year later, their daughter, Lydia, was born. 2 years after that, a son they named Samuel, after Hannah's father. The letters from the marshal finally arrived. Marcus Thorne had died before he could be brought to trial. The Thorne Empire was dismantled, the stolen lands returned to their rightful owners, and a sizable portion of the fortune, deemed untainted by criminal activity, was awarded to his only heir, Yates. But they didn't use it for themselves. They used it to rebuild Whispering Creek, to build a new school, a proper church. They gave the town a second chance, just as it had given them one. On quiet evenings, they would walk to the old chapel. Hannah would play the song, their song. It was no longer a hymn of grief or a lullaby of loss. It was a song of survival, of redemption. It was the song of a love so strong it could rewrite the past and build a future out of the ashes. It was the story of how a melody from a lonely piano healed a broken cowboy, saved a dying town, and proved that even in the harshest of deserts, the most beautiful things can find a way to grow. If you were moved by this story of secrets, sacrifice, and the redemptive power of love, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the incredible tales we have coming your way.